Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole, and today I'm going to be sharing with you what I'm currently reading. To begin with, I'd like to make sure that I put up on the screen somewhere, probably up over here, what my page count is. So my goal is to read 30,000 pages before I do any sort of serious book haul where I'm spending my own money. And the number up there represents where I am at. Let's do an update today and see how low I can get that number. I'm going to go ahead and start with books that I have either unhauled or DNF'd and am unhauling or that kind of thing. So the first book I will mention is The Guest Cat. This was a book that I took out from the library in December and thought that I would get to it because it's actually a really short book. Ironically, I made a couple of different choices in December and didn't end up getting to this book, and so I just returned it to the library. My library also has a cart that is called a read and return cart where you can take a book out. You don't need a library card to do it, and you can keep the book for as long as it takes for you to read it and then return it whenever you're done. The book that I took out for that is And Then There Were None. And because my camera is so sensitive with the autofocus, I'm just going to put the books that I'm talking about here. Hopefully it won't crash. And Then You Were None by Agatha Christie. This was, again, another short book that I picked up while I was at the library and thought, ooh, I've wanted to read Agatha Christie. I'm not sure if I'm going to like her writings because it's not a genre I tend to read in. So this is just going to go on my bookshelf, and hopefully I'll get to it sometime soon. Because it is from my library, if I end up having to move before I get to it, I'm not going to take this with me. I will return it to my library. And because I also don't want to just unfairly keep it on my shelves forever, likely I will return it if I don't get to it in the next month or two. So I did have a book that was on my December TBR that ended up being a soft DNF, and that book was The Soul of Black Folk. So I did actually think I was going to get to The Soul of Black Folks. This is by W.E.B. DuBois, and it is a series of 14 essays. However, what I ended up finding is I got through maybe the first four essays at the beginning of December, and then got caught up in a couple other books that I was reading, and came back to it over Christmas break and realized these are not essays that I want to read over Christmas break. So I have put that on hold for now. My hope is to come back to it in February. However, I also realized that I don't want to read a series of nonfiction essays as a book that I'm just reading straight through. I'd prefer to handle it like I do short story collections, which is I treat each individual story as its own book. So I'm going to treat these essays as 14 as what they are, which is 14 essays that are just all happen to be related on the same theme. And so when I pick one, I'm just going to pick one essay out of the book. So for now, it's going to go back on my bookshelf, but that does mean that I will be counting the pages for them individually. So far in The Soul of Black Folk, I have read 96 pages, so that will come off my page count. The next book that I DNF'd is actually a book that I started and attempted today, and that book is The Great Alone by Kristin Hannah. The Great Alone is a story that is about a family featuring a 13-year-old girl, her mother, and her father who served in Vietnam War and has come back a changed and angry man. An opportunity comes up for them to move to Alaska and live in a house on sort of an abandoned land that they can take care of and sort of make their own oasis, if you will. Apparently, as the winter goes on, they realize that all they have successfully done is basically removed themselves to a very remote place where the mom and the daughter now need to fend for themselves as the father sort of mentally deteriorates and, from what I can tell, goes into a rage. So the reason I decided to DNF this is because I very quickly realized in the story that this wasn't just going to be him mentally having problems, but was going to be more about him physically becoming more abusive. And there's a lot of hints in the book that he was already at least emotionally abusive and dangerous towards the mom long before this, even though she seems to be indicating otherwise to the daughter. I was listening to this as an audiobook, and I did make it through chapter 3, and I just realized that I'm really not interested in reading a more contemporary historical fiction novel that is largely about surviving abuse. I think those stories are important, and some people enjoy them, I guess. I'm personally not one of them. If I'm going to read about domestic violence and that kind of thing, I tend to handle it better, I guess I would say, if it is in a nonfiction book that is a story of survival, hope, inspiration, that kind of thing. So there are so many books that I want to read. I just realized that Kristin Hannah, who last book, made me ugly cry was sure to do this in this book, and I just really didn't want to go be taken on an emotional roller coaster. That to me was maybe going to feel somewhat intentional. I should add that The Great Alone is 545 pages, and that will come off my page count total because it is a DNF and I will be unhauling it. Next, let's move on to the books that I have finished. These are not necessarily all books that I finished in January. They are just books that I have finished since my last wrap-up video. So the first book I did not finish in January. I think I mentioned in my last video, I was currently reading it and expected to finish it in December, and I did. That book was An Irish Country Doctor by Patrick Taylor. Barry Laverty is a recently graduated doctor who is striking out on his own and is decided to try and give his hand at being a Irish country doctor, basically. So a doctor who works out in the countryside, lives in a village, and works as a general practitioner for the local village people. He decides to come under the guidance of Dr. O'Reilly, who is a basically veteran doctor who is working out in the village of Ballybuckleboo. Which is like just a little squirt of a town, it sounds like. This book is really rich in descriptions of the Irish countryside. It uses a lot of local dialect and terms that I was not familiar with. There is a glossary at the back of the book. I did not realize that until I finished the book. It would have definitely made the book an easier read if I had, because there were a lot of terms that I had to look up or just figure out contextually. But I really appreciated that. The reason I really felt mixed about this book, however, was because it was definitely a cozy, lighthearted read, but it just didn't grip me enough to keep me interested the whole time. There were times where I just felt bored, I guess, is the truth of the matter. The book started out really well, very cute story going on, but I would say somewhere in the middle, it just kind of started to drag. And that part just got a little slow. There really wasn't much happening, and I get that sometimes in lighthearted, cozy tales you have that, but it was just a bit much and didn't work that well for me. Towards the end of the book, however, it started to pick up more. It didn't last that long. It was a very short book, so that helped. I think if it was a longer book, I may have eventually DNF'd it. I think the other reason that I'm feeling really torn about it is that it did work really well over Christmas time. If you're looking for a lighthearted read with, some action happening, but nothing too serious, and everything's going to work out okay and that kind of thing, I would recommend this to you. So I would say that I would give this book a 3-star. Like, it was good, but it's not something that I would recommend to everybody. I think I would just recommend it if somebody was looking for a lighthearted read. So I will be unhauling this book. I'm definitely, not going to reread it. Those tend to be the only books that I keep. So an ongoing theme this month, and with my reading in general, I feel like right now has been having really mixed feelings and having a hard time deciding how I feel about books. And that was also true for my reading of Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. Life After Life was the first book that I officially read this year, and it was really good. I just realized I didn't tell you how many pages are in Irish Country Doctor. There are 337 pages at the end of this book. There are also recipes that are mentioned in this book at the end, as well as a glossary. And I only just now realized that there's also an afterword that's written by Mrs. Kincaid. How did I miss this? I haven't read that part yet. So I'm going to sit down later today. It's only like a page or two and read that. Okay, back to what I was saying about Life After Life. So I read Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, and I really enjoyed this book. So this was a 5-star prediction for me. I was disappointed because it wasn't a 5-star for me, but let me tell you what it's about first. So Life After Life is about a young woman, I guess we'll say, named Ursula Todd. And you very quickly start to realize that one of the features of Ursula's life is that she lives it over and over again, no matter how many times she dies nor how she dies. And I love a good time loop trope, and I have heard a lot about the time loop in this book being really good, and I agree it is. Um, the things that I think worked super well in this book was just that feeling of her doing it over and over again, and you're wondering how that's going to go, if things are going to change. You start to wonder if she's going to recognize that she's living her life over and over again, and just exploring what that whole experience is like. If you like the movie Groundhog's Day, I think you will like this book. I think the main reason that it's not a 5-star read for me is because the pacing of the plot got a bit off for me at one point. I put page flags, specifically the darker red ones, every time she died. And so you can see that towards the beginning of the book, she's dying pretty often. This is not a spoiler. This will not ruin the book for you. And that there's times where her death occurs like way closer together. And then towards the middle, it's a lot more spread out. I didn't have a problem with that specifically, but what I did have a problem with was that I didn't feel like the pacing was handled well. What I felt like happened was just as you were getting used to her sort of reliving her life and seeing that sequence happen very close back to back to back, you then had longer periods of getting to know her. And there are specifically two time periods that stand out to me where you really get to see a lot of her life. And quite frankly, I thought it was a bit long and drawn out and kind of boring comparatively. Even though they were important time periods in her life, I didn't feel like they deserved as much page time as they got. That said, it was just one part of the book. It didn't ruin the book for me. It just kept it from being a book that I felt convinced that I'd want to reread over and over and over again. I would recommend this book to anybody who likes time loops, who likes exploring ideas and concepts surrounding time and the idea of living your life over again in whatever way you might think that idea is fascinating. She does explore just sort of one or two concepts of that, and it's definitely more of a time loop idea of it versus like a reincarnation or a resurrection or anything like that. So if you enjoy that, if you enjoyed, like I said, Groundhog's Day, or you like the book The Midnight Library, I've heard a lot of people compare this book to that. I would say that this book is better, though it is longer, but I would also say that it's a very fast, easy read. So I'm giving it a high 3 because I would recommend it to most people. I think even if you're not interested in time loops, there's a lot about this book and her writing style that I think people would enjoy. And I am tempted to reread it over and over again, but I don't think I will, honestly. I think I would probably just look for other books that talked about the same theme and topic. Life After Life is 529 pages long. So continuing with the theme of I just can't decide how I feel about these books is The Romance of the Forest by Anne Radcliffe. The Romance of the Forest is about a young woman named Adeline who at the very beginning of the book is mysteriously and very abruptly thrown into the protection of a family that she has never met before. And Adeline and this family, who are fleeing from Paris from the law due to their debts, all find themselves in a very odd situation where they are running off, trying to escape various people who may or may not be pursuing them. They end up getting stuck in a sort of forest in the middle of nowhere and stranded at an abandoned abbey. And this abbey is creepy beyond belief. The family tries to make the most of their situation there, as well as trying to discover what's going on about this mysterious abbey that a lot of the semi-local village people are spreading tons of rumors about. While they try to seek sanctuary there, the story continues on and just gets crazier and crazier. If you know anything about Gothic novels, they tend to be very sensationalized. There is lots of action and drama and supernatural elements, maybe, and things of that nature. I should say a lot of people, based on the title of the book, think this is a romance novel. It is not. There is some romance in it very much later in the book, but that is not the focus or purpose of the book. The word romance in the title actually refers to the 18th century definition of romance, which would either mean like fanciful, as in like fairy tale-esque, that kind of thing, or in reference to landscape, a romantic landscape would be one that is like very wild, so sort of a wilderness setting. So you can see that The Romance of the Forest being a Gothic novel, all of those terms in some ways kind of apply. It is definitely a very fanciful and extremely implausible sounding story that takes place by and large in various wilderness type settings. So I did mention that I had mixed feelings about this book. I went into this book with no particular expectations, and at the very beginning of the book, which starts with a bang and just keeps going from there, I was having a great time. And I was very enthralled by the storytelling style. And some of the themes and action that was going on reminded me both of Pamela as well as Clarissa. And it's like you took those two books and combined them with the atmosphere of Jane Eyre and Rebecca and mashed them up into one story that had as much action as The Count of Monte Cristo. And if you've read any of those books and try imagining them put together, you may have a hard time. It was great. It was well paced, and I enjoyed it, and it worked really well for me. The ending was extremely satisfying, and surprisingly didn't feel too cliche. I thought it was going to. That said, there were a couple of things that I didn't think worked out very well. There is a time about two-thirds maybe into the book where there is a major shift in the story, and I think the intention of the shift was to bring you more into a different time and space and feel. And in some ways, I think that was accomplished. In other ways, I think it was really overdone and ended up to me feeling like a very different book and story and set of characters altogether. And I really did not like that because I really had gotten used to the feel that the book had up to that point. That really took me out of the story, took me out of the drama, and made me start disliking the book. And then we hit rock bottom, by which I mean it was already getting a little bit too like 18th century like romance period for me by and during that section of the book where it was like all about the landscape and the birds and like, the sublime and things that I'm just not a big fan of in 18th century British lit. And then, as if that wasn't enough, she goes into the forest at night, and I couldn't help but think to myself, and I'm sure she's going to hear a bird and it's going to be the nightingale. And it was. And then, to make it even worse, in my opinion, there was a poem about a nightingale. I came this close to DNFing this book. I swore to myself at the end of college that I was never going to read another 18th century poem about that stupid nightingale. It talk about the cliche overdone done trope. One, I'm not a fan of 18th century British poetry. I'm sorry, I'm not. It's the Romantic period, Byron. Everybody loves them. Not everybody. I don't. I'm sure there are other people out there who agree with me, but they just, the nightingale, like, I just kept reading about it and hoping that somebody would just shoot that bird in the bush. Like, make it stop. I'm sorry. Like, I don't really mean that. But that was just a part of the book that, as you could tell, I did not enjoy. And to me, it just didn't make sense to go to that sphere for so long in the middle of a Gothic novel. So I'm hoping that's something that Anne Radcliffe in the future improves on in her writing and maybe tightens up a little bit. I do own The Mysteries of Udolpho, and I know a lot of people like that book better, and I'm wondering if that's why, because that was really my only complaint. Thankfully, that section of the book ended, and in some ways, oddly, picked up with the drama right where it left off, and things became extremely complex and complicated to the point where I felt like I needed to be one of those people who had like the white pieces of paper on the wall and was connecting them with the red strings to see how all the ideas connected. And it was a crazy end. Overall, I really enjoyed this book, but again, I'm torn. Like, it's not a 5-star read for me, and I was really hoping it would be. But then there is still a part of me that's like, but it's a significant piece of work. Maybe I would want to read it again. But then I'm like, but then I'd have to read through that entire middle section, and I can't do it. So I'm giving this book a 3.5. I would recommend it for people who, one, really like the Romantic period. It's going to feel like you're reading almost like a medieval novel. Like, if you like that more medieval feel, not Shakespeare Old English, but somewhere in between, then you will like this book. I think given the syntax, it may be difficult for some people to get into this book. And I think some people could also struggle with the like excessive amount of drama going on. You may get stuck on the implausibility of it and not be able to enjoy it for that reason. So I don't know. That's my thoughts on the book. You can make of it what you will and decide if it's something that you like. Okay, gotta keep it moving because we're getting long here. So On to what I am currently reading. I am reading The Unfair Advantage on my Kindle. The Unfair Advantage is a book that I'm reading for my family book club, and it is basically a Christian nonfiction that I would say is largely inspirational. If you like books in that vein, I would say that this is a very well written book, but I do think the biggest con is that it does tend to lean on the side of pretty cliche. It's a good book to discuss. I don't feel like I'm the best target audience for it for a variety of reasons. Its target audience is probably people who are at the beginning of their career or just graduating from college or even just going to college. Really, anyone who is a Christian who has some dream. Like, you definitely have to have a dream already. So that is it for today. I am really excited about all the books that I have read and that I'm going to be reading. Let me know if you have read any of these books. Yeah, you have any of thoughts about the books that I have yet to read. So let me know what you are currently reading and have a great day.